So did y'all have any questions with any of the homework or anything, or? Well, I'll just keep working some of the problems that after I log in here to find them. Gosh, I can't even. That was Bernoulli's. Okay. I guess I could. Let me look at those. Should I talk about any of those? Or did I? I think I did. I think I did those. Those are on, they're out there on the stream somewhere. But that's, okay. Gosh, that's 8. There's no way to go to the next one without going back to the content area. Oh, okay, then there's this. That's where I was. I was in there doing these. And I sort of poked around at that one. That? Oh, no, I didn't. I need to go back and do it. I think that one might be right. And I think that one is not right. Let me go back. Can you send me an email to remind me of that? Maybe I could do that later today if I had a reminder. Okay, and that's the blank page. Maybe I could change that out too. So maybe I should go on to the next one, which the next one would be 10. Or no, because this is out of sequence. This is 10, but that is 9. Next semester I got to get this part fixed. So 11 is actually homework. 10, okay. So let's look at these. And I need to fit in okay, so here's what I need to do. I need to fill in with chapter 7 for a minute. First, let me see if I can find, just as a backdrop to 8. Okay, this is weird. Okay, wait a minute. That's something called quick access. I don't know. Here, I don't know what this PC, main fluids. Okay, okay, 5th edition. Oh gosh. Here we go. Yeah, this is kind of weird. Okay. So I'll try to quickly go through this, but luckily he started this using a type example because it's the classic example. So I guess I can go ahead and start. So this is a whole chapter on the reality of what happened over. It's kind of historical in a way, but there's a lot of math to it as well. So years and years ago, people were doing all these experiments. They didn't know exactly how things were turning out. So what they did is they took some pipes. I don't know how many, but apparently there was a large number, 30 and 40,000 different experiments. And they just ran water through here, or they ran a fluid. It didn't have to be water. And I don't know, of course, water is the most common fluid you can get to, but they probably used other fluids as well. And then they started varying the length, the diameter, and started changing the flow rate through there and swapped out the fluid. Now, if you look at it, the fluid is this. So you pick a fluid and you're kind of tied to the density of the fluid and the viscosity of the fluid. You can't really change it unless you change the fluid. You could turn your pump up faster or open a valve backstream and you get a faster velocity coming through there. And then you can, rope off sections and have different pipes of different diameters. And then what they were doing is they were observing this. So they were, I guess you could say these were the independent variables, and this is what depends on the independent variables, dependent variables. So they started changing it around. Now, it actually is a little bit more complicated than that because there was the type of pipe too, but in this particular example, he's not explaining it that way. So he ran thousands and thousands of experiments. And through a series of observations, they found something interesting here. Well, first, they plotted them. Okay, so now this is not something that they do anymore, but if you look at this and say, okay, the velocity, the density, and the viscosity is constant, this is what you get. You get delta P over a length of pipe. Now his delta PL is actually the change in pressure per unit length. So he runs this and you get this plot. You get a bunch of data points, probably more than that, and you say, okay, this is great. Then what happens, you come back over and you look at this, you start changing your velocity, opening the valve backstream, and you get this, probably a bunch of data points distributed all around here. Now this could be the same set of data, it's just they aligned it so that this is all constant here, this is all constant here, and they make this the variable and I start observing it. So the question is, you're trying to get a handle on what makes this thing happen, because Bernoulli's equation will tell you if you didn't change the diameter of your pipe back up here, that there isn't a pressure drop. But in reality, you observe it, it's right there. So how do you make a relationship between all the variables? Now, in today's context, there are new methods that are kind of in the artificial intelligence regime that you can actually put on this problem and it'll solve it without you interjecting. It turns out it gives exactly the same answers that this method gave, and this method was, dates back to, it goes as far back into the 1800s. But what they found is hey, wait a minute. And this was through some observations of people who had observed things and started saying, hey, there's some things that look similar here. They did a parameter like this, and then they observed that a parameter like this in all their experiments collapsed along here. And then they realized, hey, wait a minute, so you got all your experiments collapsing along that line. And of course, I'm doing that because one of the things that I don't like about fluid mechanics is they present something nice and beautiful to you, but exactly it's not that easy. There's distributed points and you have to fit curves, and there's a lot of curve fitting in fluid mechanics, and even more so in heat transfer, especially in the convection part. So they observed that, hey, these don't have any dimensions. For example, pressure has, pounds per square inch, or a force over a length squared. But if you start looking at all these had no dimensions. And they begin to see this a lot. And then they were like, hey, wait a minute, nature has this way of doing this. So in fact, can we make a function that looks like this? Now, before you go in too further, you'll notice something interesting about the thing on the left. I'll talk about the thing on the right in a minute. But when you did Bernoulli's equation, I'm kind of doing it over here on the side. 1/2, oops, okay, 1/2 rho v squared plus p plus the other term, but for the moment, I don't care about the other term. It's just the gamma z, but that doesn't come into play right here. They noticed is, what you notice here, that doesn't have any units. So you'll notice a rho and a v squared has the same units of pressure. So if you sort of move out to the left here and you say, I have a D, I have a delta P, okay, and this term is a delta P over an L, and then I'm multiplying this times 1 over rho v squared. First of all, this length of pipe has the same dimensions as here, and I'm scratching them not by value, but by dimension. And this has the same dimensions of that. So in fact, this term on the left has no dimensions. But ironically, or interestingly, this eraser works weirdly. It's interesting to note that something strange can occur like that. That by nature, if you do this, you get a nice curve. It turns out this on the left-hand side seems like it makes sense if you've seen Bernoulli's equation. And at that time, they had already seen it. The right term is actually the Reynolds number, or something that at the time they didn't have a name for it, but then later they named it the Reynolds number. So it turns out it actually absolutely works. And then they were like, okay, so this whole concept of non-dimensionality works all the time in fluids, and it actually works in a lot of stuff. So they began to look at the units. So before they were like, okay, units are this, but now the units become front and center. If you look at it, if you're looking at a force length time representation, you'll see that this term basically has no units. You'll also see that the other term has no units either. And then, he goes on to the next page and starts describing this. And he says, hey, wait a minute. Now, this seems like a strange, if an equation involving k variables is dimensionally homogeneous and can be represented by a relationship of k minus r independent dimensions, where r is the minimum. So it seems like gibberish until you look down and you realize, hey, wait a minute. So he's got a general relationship here. And then he says, this general relationship can be replaced with this one, in which these are non-dimensional, this is non-dimensional. All these on the right are non-dimensional. So what before we saw here was we had a relationship which I think would had the length of it had the diameter of the pipe, the viscosity, the density. I don't think I had it in the right order, and that. But it also has this term. So if you notice, he labels them 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up to k. Now if you look back up in there in k, we realize we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 5 variables here. Now, what are the other dimensions that are used to reduce it? Because he said you have k and you have r. Well, what's the r? The r is the fact that you embedded in these terms, all of these terms had a force. Now, if you have a force and a mass, that constitutes one term, because you can use F is equal to ma to swap all masses into forces or forces into masses. But if you have F, an L, and a T, that's 3. So it turns out 5 minus 3 is equal to 2. And that's what you had back there. So it's that simple. So then he goes on and starts doing it. List all the variables, and then the geometry, list each of the terms, and list them like this. Okay, so here he says this. For a typical fluid mechanics problem based on MLT or FLT. These sets are related through Newton's second law because that, for example, the density can be represented as a mass per cubic volume, which makes sense, but it can also be represented by this. And why? Because F is equal to ma means a force is equal to a mass times a length over T. So pounds, or let's do it in newtons, is equal to a kilogram meter second squared. And so if you have a kilogram, it can be moved back into a newton. And so that's where this comes from. So if you look at it, density is equal to mass over that. That makes sense, kilogram meters cubed. But it can also be represented in a bizarre kind of way, because m is equal to f L to the minus 1, getting it from here, and then T squared. Take this and this term to the other side. So that means you have F, if I'm replacing this, I have F L to the minus 1, T squared over L to the third. So what do you have? You have F L to the minus 4, and then T squared. So in fact, if you have an M representation, you can get an F representation of it. So then the step is, he says, well, determine the required number of pi terms. The pi terms are those non-dimensional terms. And they called them pi terms, I think. I don't know. I guess it was Buckingham that came up with it, but I guess he used the pi's. So, but and this book does an okay job historically. Oh, here it is. Oh, wait. Although several early investors, including Lord Raleigh, the 19th, contributed to develop okay, that's his first name, Edgar Buckingham. So they have a name associated with the basic theory. He stimulated interest in the United States, probably because early part of the 20th century. For example, so it dates to about 1914. So, and I saw some data from the 20s and 30s. So obviously, they were using this to pick up the data and trying to non-dimensionalize things. But you can see it dates back, and you'll find that a lot in these things. You'll see people who publish something significant that reference someone who had already passed away. So, and in this case, they were both similar. Raleigh was, Lord Raleigh came up with a lot of stuff. Okay, the page is not going forward there. So then what does he do? Okay, in the book, what he does, goes in, he takes the problem. That's the problem that was presented a minute ago. And then the first thing he does is he breaks the units. He says, here are my units. Got 5 sets related to FLT. He's obviously listed them FLT here. And that's 3. So 5 minus 3 gives you 2. So you got to go after 2 pi terms. Then it's like a SAT puzzle. For example, you look at this, and you can argue anything you want. So here's your deal. Hang on. A lot of times people all the time argue things that are not logical, and this is a good case where this is not a philosophy. Where, let's say I wanted to pick D. I wanted to use a term to pick D, rho, V, and I just wanted to do those 3. So if you did that, you'd have an L, you'd have this, and you would have that. So then the problem is, no matter what you pick of these 3, there is an F sitting there all by itself with no F here and no F here to clobber it. So this means you have to have the basic, every term here has to have a basic other term to clobber the terms. If there's an F here and there's no F in this one or this one, it won't work. Because you got to have another F. So you start looking at it, so that means for every one you pick that has an F, you have to have another F. So let's take a look at this. This is where the SAT puzzle comes into play. So if you're trying to get rid of the F, you got an F here, here, and here. So there has to be a term. If you pick this term, you have to have at least one of these two to clobber the force out of the other one. And if you had like, okay, so for a T, for example, if you have a T right here, and you do have a T right there, you have to have the term here to clobber it. Because there, oh no, I'm sorry, there is a T here. You can have this term as well. There's no T in this one and no T in that one. So one of any one of these three has to be combined together. In other words, you can't have the density without having the viscosity or the velocity, because you'll have a hanging time term you can't get rid of. So it's like a puzzle. But there's even a deeper part to this. Okay, so the next thing he does is he picks the three. I'm sorry, he picks the four. Now, why do you need four? Well, you had F, L, and T. Turns out that'll give you three equations. Now, you've got three unknowns, the A and the B and the C. The other term is usually carried because it needs to clobber out one of the other terms. There are rare cases where you can get just three, but in this case you can't, because you have to have enough terms to clobber out all the dimensions in the other terms. So it's a massive SAT puzzle or ACT puzzle or something, or logic puzzle. So then he goes through it, and he basically pulls away the units of the F. For example, you see F here, this, and that with the C. So you'll see over here for the F, at least for the F, you see that. Oh, I'm sorry. I circled the 4. I should have not circled the 4. There's nothing to circle there. So this term came from that exponent. The C, I'm sorry. The C came, well, okay. Let me erase that again. I drew the arrow to the wrong location. Okay, let's go back. Oh, let's go to it. Okay, so all of them have to equal 0. The F, the L, and the T. So if I look at the F, I got an F here, and I got an F here. So I really, okay. Now, the F that's the single by itself F sits right here. This one has a C as its exponent, and so it ends up right here. Now, take a break, and let's look at the L, which that's the most, the richest equation, so to speak. There's the most terms in it. So the L has this term. You have an L here with the B. You have an L here with the C, and that's all you have. So you grab this first L, which I didn't write a circle around it. It's the -3. The exponent here is the A. The exponent here. Now this is a 1, so this exponent becomes B. Now this one is a -4 and a C. So you see the -4 and the C. And then same thing you have to do with the other one, and that is that you do it again for the T, and it becomes the same way every single time. I wish these things had just erased the whole line. With the T, you only have this one, and then you have this one, 2C and a -1B. And then you solve that. And you're trying to enforce or determine a pi term. So you get a pi term, right? So this is a non-dimensional term. And then you do this on the second pi term, and you do it again, but you have a different set of equations. So you end up with 2 pi terms. And then you can stop and double check them if you want. That's what he's doing right here. Or what he does here is, what does he do? He uses the mass. So this is the FLT, and this is the MLT, and they both give you no units. That's only half the story. Because, and I'll tell you this story, there was a gentleman I knew that did some work that had enormous number of pi terms. If my memory is right, I think it had like 20 or 30 pi terms. So you start thinking about it, that's a lot of data to process. It actually drove him nuts because you got 2 pi terms. You could have other sets of pi terms. The key is you got to go in and plot them. So you got to plot a pi 1 versus a pi 2. And if the data does this, you've done the wrong pi term. Or you didn't do the wrong pi term. It isn't a good pi term. Then you might come back and pick another set, and that one does this. And so you're like, oh, that's it. And that's what you do. You go in and you run a set, you get your set of pi terms, you take your data, and you plot them. And if it looks awful, you say chunk it and go back and grab a new set and try to get a new set of pi terms. You start looking at it and you can get into the math of this, and it's very complex because you've got to match terms and you get this permutation, and you can literally get a problem set, which I don't even remember what it was, but it was something like 20,000 different combinations of pi terms he could have that he had to go through and determine which one was the pi terms. Now, luckily, for our case, Reynolds number is spot on. It almost, and that's an upside down of the Reynolds number, by the way. This is the actual Reynolds number. And so Reynolds number is the term. You know, it almost always sits, hang on, it almost always sits in there as being one of the pi terms. So that helps you. So it reduces your pi terms by 1, and then you can start working on other terms that you might know, which actually you get further into this, and you'll find he has, there you go. Here's a whole list of pi terms, non-dimensional numbers. I'll call them non-dimensional numbers, but they can be used for pi terms. You know, Reynolds number is by far the most common. You've heard of the Mach number. It's just the velocity over the speed of sound. There's Freud number, which actually has to do with naval architecture a lot. And those are, you know, like, I'm not a good drawer, but here's a boat going that way. Then you'll have, that's a bad drawing too, you'll have the waves coming off here. So on a boat, you'll have drag due to the waves that are coming off here, which are related to this, and you'll have the viscous drag, which is related to that. Often it's very hard to get both those to match at the same time in a wind tunnel or in a water tunnel. Speaking of that, because this thing can be dimensioned down, means that you don't have to build an entire jet and put it in a giant wind tunnel. You can do a scaled model of it. And because of that, that makes things pretty handy. So there's the other terms. So it turns out, okay, so let me make the long story short by going to chapter 8, which actually I think that's where he ends up with it. Okay, that we don't need. Let's go back and look at 7. No. Okay, so let's look at 7. That's 8. I meant to hit 7. So I think if I go to the very end of this, I see nothing. Oh, okay. I'm mistaken, maybe. That plot looked, okay, well, okay. So there he's talking about models, using them in a similitude, basically scaling your model, putting in a wind tunnel. But what I wanted to get to, he doesn't necessarily get to, I think, in this chapter that I can see. So what happens, let's go on to the next chapter, which is basically where, this is one of the most important chapters. He goes through laminar flow. He goes through starts of turbulent flow. And turbulent flow is very random high speed variations in fluids like this. So laminar means that, this is the velocity at a point. And if you pick a point A there in the fluid and you just stare at it, if the flow just stays at a constant velocity throughout time, generally it's thought of as being laminar. It'll sometimes spuriously get upset and then calm back down. This is sometimes called transitional. But if it completely never settles on any sort of stability, it's what they call turbulent. And basically what they'll do is they'll take the average, that's not a U average at A, that was meant to C, and then they'll look at the variation up and down. They go through this, and here, okay, is it the control? Yeah. So you have entrance regions, and let's see, I'm trying to get to the crux to the issue. Let's say for laminar flow, you'll end up with an equation that looks very much like this, or actually is like this, where here, you see your delta P over L, and you have to realize that's the velocity times the area. And so you see a dependence on viscosity, and a dependence on D. And of course, there is a dependence on D in there as well. So you'll see velocity, or you can rewrite it the way it was before. Delta P over L, in this case a funny looking L, is dependent, or a function, of the velocity. And you see that. This D, and in this particular case, I don't see a density. That I'll put a question mark on. So you see this dependency, see a type of dependency like that. As it turns out, when you get into turbulent flow, it's not so easily represented. So what happens to them is they went through the whole process and they came out with a plot, hang on, okay, which is related to this. This is the head loss, and it basically is delta P over gamma. So this is the head loss, or a pressure drop over the gamma down a pipe. The non-dimensional term here is this one. So they so the previous one, they had a Reynolds number named for it. And instead of just calling this one like pi 2, they decided to call it the friction factor. And it can be related to, that's the Darcy-Weisbach equation right there. Now, how does that relate to what you need to know for like your exams? Is this. This is the biggest. You will have to learn how to read this. Now, what is this? This is something called the Moody diagram. You could search it on the internet. It's everywhere. So you have a non-dimensional term and another non-dimensional term. But you also have a third non-dimensional term. Okay, and this one wasn't brought up in the previous chapter, but what this one is simply this here. It's that you might have a pipe that looks like this and super smooth, but you also might have one that's rough. And so what they'll do is measure the roughness and make a relationship between it and the diameter. So guess what? Here's your other pi 3. That's your third term. And they ran a bunch of experiments, and that's what they got. Now, it's presented to you beautifully, but in fact, this is the part that bugs me, is it really should be like, there's a bunch of points here. So, how are they distributed? I don't know. They don't tell you that. So you should get an answer for your problem, but you should also be aware that it might not be exact. There might be something going on in there, that your data point might be up here, or maybe it's down a little bit. But we got enough time that I can work a quick problem here. So let's say we have in this I can erase pretty easily. Let's say we have a pipe, and I'm going to make up a bunch of numbers if that's okay. So we have just a simple pipe. The length is 100 feet. Diameter, just because I'm tired, it's 1 foot. The density, the viscosity. Okay, so we'll kind of make it water. 2e, I'm throwing away some digits. E to the minus 5. And I'll say it's, 1.94 slugs per cubic foot. And I want to know if it's 100 foot and my velocity is going, and it's that big, and my velocity is equal to, that's a pretty big diameter, so I'll make this kind of fast, maybe 50 feet per second, which is actually pretty fast. What's the pressure drop? So what you do is you come in, you write Bernoulli's equation. That's your first thing, always. That's location 1, not 4, sorry. So P1, but we write this version of Bernoulli's equation. G1 plus G1 squared over 2G. I'm sorry, I need to pick up the pen off the thing a little bit better. Minus, we're going to lose some energy due to the friction. V squared over 2G equals to P2 over gamma plus Z2 plus V2 squared over 2G. Fact number 1, let's just say it doesn't change elevation. So these are gone. Fact number 2, the diameter doesn't change. So V2 is equal to V1. We'll say area 1 is equal to area 2. Doesn't change. So guess what? This term isn't 0, but it equals to this term, and so they can just be canceled. Next thing I can do is take this term, I'll take this P2 and this P1, and put them together over here, and I'll take this minus sign and move it over there. So what you find out is, if I can make the page go down, you'll find delta P over gamma is equal to F L over D V squared over 2G. All right, so let's start hammering this thing off. Okay, so a second ago, we said it was 100 foot long. We said the diameter was 1. We're using English stuff, so 32.2. What did I say the velocity was? It was 50, wasn't it? Was it? Yeah, 50. So this is 50 squared. Okay. And we'll say it's still water, so we get F times, I'll take that over, that is 62.4 times 100 divided by 1 times 50 squared divided by 32.2. What's that? That's your problem. Okay, so if you could get that, you could get the rest. So how do you get that? Well, look back to this table, which is right here, right there. Okay, so I need to have this, and I need to have this. So you have to have, well, okay, is it a smooth pipe? This is the smooth pipe. Is it really rough and have lots of bumps on it, like really bad? This is what it looks like. So let's go back and calculate the Reynolds number. Rho velocity diameter over mu is equal to 1.94. Velocity was 50, I think. Diameter was 1. And this was 2e to the minus 5. So 50 times 2 is 100. So this would be 2. Okay, so wait, 50 times 2 would be 100 over about 2 or about 5. E to the 5 or 6?
5.
That e to the, so we'll say roughly it's about that, about a half, roughly 500,000. That's about, I mean, that's normal. Okay, so let me get some of the junk off here, because now it becomes kind of critical, because this is the part where you kind of, this is what they expect you to know on. Oh, I didn't talk about the E over D. I didn't say, let's just make up that E over D for this pipe, because we haven't decided yet. E over D for this pipe is 0.001. How about another O? We'll make it 3 O's and a 1. And we got that. So we know it's Reynolds number of this. We know that. Let's see if we can find that. Okay, Reynolds number of a half. Oh, that's the wrong. Reynolds number of a half of a, somewhere around in here. So just draw a vertical line, hoping that it stays vertical. And it looks kind of okay. It's not terrible. Now, did I have 3 digits? I had 3 zeros, right?
Yeah.
And so what I do is trace this one back, and then bam, there they go. They cross each other, and then you head this way, and that's your F friction factor for that case, 0.015. That's it. Now you just come in here and strike that out, put in 0.0, what did I just say? 0.015. And that's it. And then you just, multiply this times all the terms that are sitting there, and that'll give you your pressure drop. Will it be exact? Maybe. Will it be off? Maybe. Will it be off by much? Not a lot, but it'll still be off a little bit because it's a little statistical there. There can be, in fluids, there's a lot of weird things that can happen that can mess up and mess things up just a little bit. For example, there could be an upset flow because of a valve in there that happens to propagate downstream and mess things up. A lot of stuff like that. So there, we did that super high speed, and I have a meeting at 1. Luckily, my car is right out there, so I can get to it pretty quick. So there it is in a nutshell, and what we'll do, oh, that's the wrong place. We'll come back, and maybe I'll do one of these or so. This is all friction factor stuff here. There's only 2 problems. Wow. You got off kind of light. I should have gave you more. Oh, well. I'm not going to go back and add them now.
So is this question like the one you just kind of did an example of?
Yeah, that's exactly the same. Water flows rate 10 gallons per minute in a such and such diameter pipe. Now, if it's galvanized iron, here's the thing. The page before, here's all the snow. So there's a cast iron. There's your galvanized iron. So that'll be your epsilon in feet. That'll be your epsilon in millimeters. I don't know what the problem is, whether it's, so that it's in inches. So with that and that diameter, you can get your velocity. You know it's water, so you can get your density and your viscosity. Determine the pressure gradient. And so that is essentially what we did, except the numbers, of course, will be different. This is 10 gallons per minute. You can break that down, using the AV to get your flow rate, your V, to using your Reynolds number to come back and hit the Moody diagram to pull off your F, and then use the F to get that. So actually, in retrospect, that is a pretty good first problem. So it's just a simple pipe laying on the ground. It doesn't even tell you the length. It just says how much pressure do you drop for each foot. And so what you see is you drop 0.211 PSI every running foot that you go down that pipe. That's it. That's all there is. I mean, it's not that complex. We'll talk about, what are those called? Minor losses soon. I hope I didn't, oh, I got a notification. So that usually means that it was streaming. Let's cross our fingers. No, that is not the one I'm looking for. I'm looking for me. Oh, there I am. Oh, good.
Losses soon.
Oh, good. So we're there. I should have checked when I started.